Well, are we good?
Yeah, I already said go.
I'm sorry. I'm a little bit confused and a little bit nervous because tonight we have a very special guest on Doctor on Call with your host, Doc Griffin. The doctor will be with you momentarily. Our guest this evening is legendary author, actor, and comedian Philip Proctor. The following program contains humor. If extended periods of laughter cause physical pain or soreness, the host and staff suggest sharing the viewing experience with a friend. Doctor on Call cannot be held responsible for overexertion due to lengthy fits of laughter, and thereby viewer discretion is advised. Doc Griffin, paging Doc Griffin, you're needed in the OR. Stat.
And thank you very much, Nurse Aydin. And yes, tonight it's going to be a very interesting night because we have a very interesting guest. And we're going to be picking the brain of a man who's been walking through the theater of the mind for over 50 years. And that's going to be an amazing journey. So there's not going to be any prognosis and no diagnosis tonight. Tonight, we're just going to sit back and have a great conversation with Mr. Philip Proctor. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And the ironic thing about all of this is that I am playing a doctor in a wonderful play called The Cripple of Inishman by the author who wrote the movie Three Billboards Outside of Billings. Pardon me. And so I start my rehearsals tomorrow for the first time. So I'm Dr. Proctor. Doctor, I think my name is Sherry or something like that in the play. But we're all doctors here.
That is a great thing. And actually, I really did kind of like the movie adaptation of Three Billboards.
The movie adaptation? Was it anything but? Was it a book before or something? Did he write a play? I thought it was an original screenplay.
I had no idea if they had tested it out on
Oh,
stage.
no. But this play, The Cripple of Inishman, was like his first play at the West End, and it's a very wonderful, dark Irish comedy, which of course is totally redundant because anything that's Irish is going to be a little dark to begin with. But it's a very, very funny play, and it's got a large cast. And we're just starting rehearsals now, so it's going to be fun. This is in a company called the Antaeus Company here in Los Angeles, which has moved now to Glendale. We have a brand new, wonderful theater in Glendale, and this is our second season. And I've been with the company for 15 years. It's really primarily Los Angeles's primary classical theater company. My wife has been with it even longer than I, Belinda Peterson, and we've done quite a few plays together. But I'd taken a break for a while we traveled and did other things. And now this is my first play on the new stage. And so I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to run like the early January through early March. So if anybody is listening to this show who's going to be in Los Angeles or in the Glendale area, look for The Cripple of Inishman at the Antaeus Theater. It's actually Antaeus. Come see us. Okay? Antaeus. Antaeus, come see us. Anyway, that's why I look the way I look right now. If we'd done this maybe a month before, I would be clean shaven.
Well, razors are definitely optional, as are pants during our interviews, as
Good.
always.
Good. But of course, the whole point of my career in voiceover and audio is it doesn't matter what I look like. It just mattered what I sounded like. So made it very easy to be many, many characters.
Mm. Well, and I'm always a fan. I'm very fascinated with how things began, and from what I was reading in your bio, you had started off in Indiana, kind of Amish-esque. So
Well,
to
yeah,
speak.
I have a book which my wife is going to bring so I can hold it up if anybody can see me. I have a memoir called "Where's My Fortune Cookie?" available at Amazon.com, in which I tell about my early years up to where I am now and beyond. And I'm of Amish and Irish ancestry. On my mother's side, we are O'Connors, McGonagalls, and Yoders. Okay, and I
Oh.
was born in Goshen, Indiana, in northern Indiana, where the Yoder family settled, having come from Pennsylvania, where all the Amish were, and so I had a very interesting. Although I was not raised in an Amish community, of course, there were lots of Amish people around us, and we got our food and chickens and things from the Amish. Grew our own stuff in our own backyard, and the cooking was pretty much Amish, and I was able to embrace the tradition, Protestant religion, and all that stuff. And it was a fine background to come from. And my great uncle Joe Yoder wrote several books about my family, one of which is called Rosanna of the Amish, and is actually on. My wife is playing a joke on me. Thank you, dear. And is actually in its 150th printing as a paperback, and there is a mini series that you can find online of Rosanna of the Amish. It celebrates the fact that there was an Irish and Amish union back in the late 19th century, and here I am. I'm part of all of that heritage.
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's
Oh,
kind of amazing as I just look forward at your work, because I will say personally, from the things that I've listened to and the few things that I've watched, that your sense of humor seems to be very surrealist.
well, in the Midwest, we really did have a kind of a surrealist bent to comedy. My parents and my grandparents had very evolved sense of humor, and I was just talking about this the other day with some other friends. I have these fond memories of sitting around the kitchen table in Goshen, Indiana, with the adults all smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey and telling funny and very surrealistic jokes, many of which I remember and which obviously influenced my own sense of humor. So I do come out of that tradition of what would you call them? Hairy dog stories and things like that. A lot of very off the wall bizarre comedy. And actually, when I toured for many years with Peter Bergman as Proctor and Bergman, half the wits of the Firesign Theater, we found that our best audiences were invariably in the Midwest because they got our crazy abstract comedy more than other parts of the country.
Well, yeah, and I've also found that if you're looking for people who enjoy British comedy, and we'll get into Goon Show and Python in just a little bit, but it seems that the Midwest can absorb that type of humor easily.
Yeah, it's very true. When the Firesign Theater got together back in the late '60s on KPFK listener-supported radio in the Valley in Los Angeles, we found amazingly, besides the fact that we were all fire signs, I'm a Leo, there were two Sagittarians and an Aries, that we all were fans of the Goon shows back in England, which was a very surrealistic comedy program that was on the radio during the war years and up to the mid-'50s, I think, starring people like Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan and other very, very crazy...
And, of course, Harry Seacombe.
And Harry Seacombe, for those of you who are seeking to know him. And they used extraordinarily bizarre sound effects and music melded together into these crazy stories. And they made transitions from one scene to another in extremely bizarre ways that were not at all common to the history of normal theater transitions. And I just loved that because it was like free association in many ways. And Firesign, when we started working together, we improvised on a pretty high, crazy level, and everybody could follow along. Nobody got lost along the way. So that was one of the foundations of the development of the Firesign Theater comedy techniques. And as I say, it's all, if you can see this, it's all in this book, this wonderful book that I was forced to write with my co
And also, the direct link to Amazon.com for the book is down in the descriptor. So anybody looking has no excuse to not buy because the link is right there for you to use.
Illustrated, profusely illustrated, right? With pictures of girlfriends and boyfriends, no, and me. Lots of pictures of me doing various things. You see, kissing girls and things like that. Anyway, it's a fun read, and it's gotten very good response. And I do hope that if anybody's interested, they'll go to Amazon and pick up a copy. After all, it's a great stocking stuffer.
There you go. And also, Amazon, as long as you order it before, what is it, the 11th, you'll be able to get it just in time for Christmas.
Brilliant.
And now, I don't want to get too far ahead because I'm always fascinated with the journey. So when you were growing up in your teenage years, did you heavily get into your local theater? Were you part of any speech groups?
No. How can I best explain this? I did a live television program called Uncle Danny Reads the Funnies in like 1949 on WPIX TV in New York. And we improvised stories. They'd be like two young people, me and a girl, and Uncle Danny, and he would read the comics in the Daily News. And then we would improvise comments about it and play around on television. That was my first introduction to actual, real show business. And we didn't have many unions in those days, so they paid me in the sponsor's product, which happened to be hurdy-gurdy oranges. So I would get a bag of hurdy-gurdy oranges for my appearances and then have it for breakfast before I went off school. But I had moved from Goshen when my dad got a job with a law firm in New York. And so he moved the family to Manhattan, and I grew up from, I guess, about the age of 5 on at 139 East 94th Street between Park and Lexington, actually 2 blocks away from where the Marx Brothers had their apartment in earlier days in Yorktown. And
did you ever hunt them?
No, I loved them, but they were all grown up at that time. They were already legends in their own time. But the fact is that I spent my summers back in Goshen, Indiana, with my grandparents and my friends on a bike, So I had this wonderful schizophrenic upbringing where I went to a very nice private school called Allen Stevenson School. It's still around, and yet spent my summers in a small town with my friends and on bikes and having great adventures and building spaceships out of packing crates and all kinds of things that kids would do in a small town. But Allen Stevenson School to this day is a wonderful school for the arts. I was a member of the orchestra, which was started while I was there, and I play the violin to this day. And I've always had a wonderful singing voice and a sense of harmony. My entire family sang and would harmonize regularly. And so I became a member of the chorus and a soloist. And the thing about Allen Stevenson School is that every year they would do a Gilbert and Sullivan production. And since I was a boy soprano, and a pretty little boy soprano, I got to play the female leads in the Gilbert and Sullivan productions. I was Phyllis in Iolanthe, Mabel in the Pirates of Penzance. Go, ye heroes, go to glory, though you can't die in combat, glory. I can still remember that lyric. And anyway, I had a terrific education in the arts by doing the arts, which is the best way to learn. And I learned also very early that I was extremely comfortable on the stage. And I loved the adulation of an audience. I loved the laughter. I loved, being able to reach out to people and touch them and make them happy or sad for that matter. So it was a great fit for me. And I was extremely lucky to be in a school like this. The school also had a good linguistic department. We had a conversational French class. So, je parle français couramment, à vrai dire. And that was the beginning of my understanding that I had an ability to speak languages. And now I can kind of get along in like 7 languages, and I can fake my way in others. I got to speak Russian because when my schooling was Allen Stevenson School, Riverdale Country School in the Bronx, and then Yale in New Haven. I was working my way out of the city. And at Yale, my freshman year, I joined the Yale Russian Chorus because I was studying Russian. Я по-русски говорю, знаете, это очень интересно для меня. And we went to the Soviet Union for the second time, first time for me, in 1959, and sang all over Russia, all over the Soviet Union, out on street corners, sometimes in theaters, but mainly in open-air concerts, spontaneous open-air concerts. And after we would finish, there were like 40 of us, and two black jazz musicians, Willie Ruff and Dwight Mitchell Ruff duo. The citizens would surround us and ask us questions over late into the white nights, because it was during the summer and it didn't get dark till like 4 a.m. And and it was an amazing experience for me. And because of that, I learned to speak, conversational Russian, and which I still do. And of course, I loved singing in Russian. They actually just had a 65th reunion up at Yale. I wasn't able to go because I had a commitment with the theater right now. But the 65th reunion was like 100 people singing on stage, singing these wonderful old Russian folk songs and liturgical music that we learned. So anyway, that's all kind of, again, a mishmash of how I was engaged in doing theater really from the beginning. When I went then to Riverdale Country School, again, I was able to do all kinds of roles in the theater that they did there, which was very good, including some fine musical roles. And actually, that's where I made a decision. I couldn't play the violin and be on stage at the same time. Couldn't be in the orchestra and on stage at the same time. And I chose to be on stage because it was just more liberating, and that's where I really committed to doing acting as a profession.
So now was acting your major when you went to Yale?
I was a Russian major. Thank you very much. Until my sophomore year, or junior year actually, at which point I realized I was doing so much theater in the Dramat and in the drama school that it was foolish for me to think that I was going to make a living as an interpreter, or a diplomat or something like that, because I just theater was what I was doing and I loved it, and so I changed my major to drama, and I got a BA in drama before I graduated in 1962. Okay, so that's kind of how it happened. I got an agent from a show that I did. I should mention that the Dramat, where I had most of my training before I became truly professional, had people in it like Sam Waterston, John Badham, Peter Hunt, Richard Maltby, Bill Wheaton, Tom Ligon, some of these names, Austin Pendleton. Some of these names, to anybody who knows theater, would be, pretty famous. And and Peter Hunt. Many of these people became directors and wrote Broadway musicals and did all kinds of great things. And of course, Sam and I took the route to become actors. And then I stepped away from it with the Firesign Theater, which was a kind of a side trip that became not my entire profession, but became like the main part of my profession for over 50 years.
Well, one of the crown jewels.
It was
the tiara.
It was a tiara-rising experience. Let me tell you, it was a choice that I made, much like Phil Austin and David Osman and Peter Bergman. It was a choice that I made because I could be my own boss. I could write, I could sing, I could write music, I could play the instrument, I could play hundreds of different characters, and we could produce it all ourselves. And, it's a story I'll get into a little bit more. But it was tremendously liberating. Didn't have to wait for anybody to hire me, cast me in something. I didn't have to compete with anybody. I could really develop my own sense of comedy and art in this wonderful echo chamber with these other great, crazy, wonderful, talented guys. And I had worked with Peter Bergman before because he was at Yale as well. And he wrote the lyrics for two musicals that I starred in. One was Tom Jones, written by Austin Pendleton, and the other was Booth is Back in Town, also written by Austin Pendleton. So that's where I first worked with Peter. And then in the book, you'll find out the strange ways that we connected over time, and then finally ended up with on the radio, on Radio Free Oz, where he was the Wizard of Oz doing the Firesign Theater.
And yeah, that's one thing I was going to mention, because when you were at Yale, you struck up a critical friendship, which I would think set you along what became your path.
Well, actually, no. I hardly knew Bergman at all, except that he wrote lyrics that I sang, and and I saw he was an antic fellow, but we didn't make any kind of a particular connection. He was in the class of 61, as was Austin. I was in the class of 62, and so he graduated before I did, and he went off on his own adventures, some of which I was able to describe in the book. And I met up with him again in New York when I was doing an off-Broadway play, probably the one that brought me out here to Los Angeles, which is The Amorous Flea, where I won a Theater World Award along with Imelda DeMartin, my co-star. And Peter showed up. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I met this lovely girl named Susan Ansbach, who sadly just passed away.
Mm-hmm.
But she became, a reputable movie star, doing things like Five Easy Pieces and other wonderful films. She's a wonderful actress. But anyway, I spent the night with her at my third floor walk-up on West 11th Street in the Village. And in the morning, I get a knock on the door. Well, what? A knock on the door? And I open the door, and there's Peter Bergman in an army uniform with a guitar. This was like 1964, maybe, something like that. Around 64. And Susan and I had our coffee, in our bathrobes. We were waking up. He sang wobbly songs to us. My land is your land. Your house is my house. Can I sleep over? And that was where we reconnected. But even then, he went off on his own tangent, and I continued my tangent, my life. And it wasn't until many years later that I connected up with him again in Los Angeles, and where we made this extraordinary connection with the Firesign Theater, and had this long career together until he passed away about 5 years ago. He would have been 80 last week if he was still with us, and I wish he were, but he is in spirit.
Well, and it is very amazing that it seems that creative people do have a tendency to have other people orbit or gravitate towards them.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, was there one specific point where the four of you got together and said, "Yeah, I think we can do this"? And I guess we should really talk a little bit about the influence that Goon show had on you.
Well, you were talking about, talented people were living in orbits and influencing one another and going different places. The book, Where's My Fortune Cookie, is named this because so many of the things that happened in my life and are still happening in my life are bizarre coincidences, psychic events, inexplicable connections. And what had happened was I did The Amorous Flea. They brought it out to Los Angeles. I had a nice run at the Las Palmas Theater in Hollywood, and then I was called back to do another musical on Broadway called A Time for Singing, which was based on the book and movie How Green Was My Valley, which is, a nice little story about an entire mining family in Wales that dies in a cave-in.
Mm-hmm.
Great musical. Great idea for a musical. Yeah. And it actually was a lovely musical, and it was really terrific and fun to do. But it closed prematurely because we had a newspaper strike which made it, difficult to advertise. And so before we opened, we had lines around the theater. Then we opened. There were good reviews and one rotten review from the New York Times.
Oh.
And then all the papers went on strike. So we had a short run of a beautiful musical, and I was unemployed again. But I got cast in a play called A Race of Hairy Men by Evan Hunter, which was trying to explain the youth revolution. Not very well, but it was a good shot at it. And I understudied the role that Brandon DeWilde was playing. Now, some of you who are older may remember who Brandon DeWilde was. He was the boy in the movie Shane. Shane, come back, Shane. And then went on to have a pretty good career in television and movies for many years. But anyway, he and I became best friends, which we were destined to do. We'd even shared a girlfriend in the past that we found out about. He was married at this point to Susan Maw, who was the sister of one of my classmates at Yale. Okay. And Brandon and I, at one point, he was, by the way, trying to break into a singing career. So we met all these wonderful musicians, would hang out all over New York, and it was great. Some of the names are flying through my head now, but that'll take me off in another tangent. And anyway, he decided to go back out to Los Angeles and kind of reinvigorate his movie career. So we go out there, and for some reason, we connected up with Peter Fonda. So Brandon and Peter and I were hanging out in Los Angeles. We were the Three Musketeers. And at one point, Peter was working on a movie idea called Captain America. But he couldn't use the moniker Captain America because,
Marvel Comics.
Marvel Comics owned it, and they wouldn't allow it. So he changed the title of the movie to, let me think, Easy Rider. Okay, so Peter is doing his research on Easy Rider, and part of that was we heard there was going to be a protest of a curfew on the Sunset Strip in like 66 or something like that. So as research, Peter and Brandon and I went down to participate in the protest, which became known as the Sunset Strip riots.
Yep.
Things happening here, what it isn't exactly clear. And during that event, we did a little sit-down strike while the sheriffs were coming from one side and the LA police from the other to try to create a riot situation by pushing everybody together. We all sat down in front of Pandora's box, and I sat down on an open issue of the LA Free Press, which was the radical paper at the time, and I pulled it out from under my ass, and I had sat down on a picture of Peter Bergman, and it said, KPFK newsman Peter Bergman interviews returning Vietnam War veterans. And I said, KPFK newsman. So the rest of the evening progressed. Peter got beaten up by the cops. Brandon got arrested. I was writing for a newspaper in the East Village called the East Village Other, and I had a press card, and I held it up. Press, press! The cops flowed around me. I was fine. But the next day, after bailing Brandon out, I called Peter Bergman at KPFK, and he said, yeah, I'm the Wizard of Oz. And I said, yeah, what are you talking about? He said, I have a show called Radio Free Oz. It's on every night from, 12 to 3 or 11 to 2 or something like that. He said, why don't you come down? It's at a listener-supported station in the Valley, and we'll play. So I show up at the station, and I meet these two other guys, David Osman and Phil Austin. Phil Austin is producing Peter's show. David Osman has been like part of the news department there, and he's hanging around. And we discover that we're all fire signs, and we started improvising on the radio together. We discovered we had the Goons in common, lots of things like that. But Peter Bergman, in his infinite wisdom, said, we're going to be the Beatles of comedy. Okay? He said, we're going to call ourselves the Oz Firesign Theater. And we started working together. We did these extraordinary send-ups that, Peter had an enormous listening audience of late night hippies, basically, like us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so we became very successful. We did a thing called the Oz Film Festival, where we showed movies on the radio, and one of the movies was an adult film that a director named Jack Love had created, and he wanted to show it on the show. And Peter said, "Oh no, you can't! No, you can't do that. The F-CC will, shut me down. Can't show a dirty movie on the radio." And the phones lit up, and it was callers saying, "Why you let him show his movie? It's the radio. Let him show his movie on the radio. It's not going to hurt anybody." So we would play. Little Blondie pays the rent on the radio, and when that happened, we realized we got something going here. We have an audience that will go anywhere that we want to take them. No matter how far out we would go, and Bergman's show was perfect for that. He would read tarot cards for people. He would talk people down who were on bad acid trips, And at one point, he decided to have an event, and he called it a love-in, and it happened at Elysian Fields near Griffith Park in Los Angeles. And he expected, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred people to show up. It was something like 10,000 people showed up, and music was played, and I did a comic bit as a Russian poet, and everybody contributed to it, and there was face painting and drug taking and dancing, and it was just a wonderful time. It was had by all, and it was really the beginning of the recognition of the hippie movement as an entertainment reality. And Woodstock was, of course, the culmination of it, but Peter Bergman started it with the Love-In, and we were there.
Well, and it almost sounds like the typical Hollywood story. You just had to find the right face to sit on.
Yeah, that's right. And in those days, it was expected of you.
Oh, okay. I do have to stop for just a moment. We did have a Streamlabs for $10. It says, "Hey friends, Ralph Spoilsport here from Spoilsport Motors, the world's largest new and used new automobile dealership. Ralph Spoilsport Motors here in the city of Emphysema."
But is he one of your sponsors?
No, one of our listeners, one of the audience.
Ah, good. You can also he had a new business, Ralph Spoilsport's used body parts, made in America from Americans. You see, while other people are falling apart around you like rotten fruit, you can extend your life with Ralph Spoilsport's used body parts, etc., etc.
And we thank you for the dono, Merc. We appreciate it. Now, of course, coming up at the top of the hour, we are going to field your questions. So please do make sure and have your questions set up and ready. But one of the things that I think really, and this is one of the things that truly fascinates me, is that you guys were at the forefront of the theater of the mind movement in the United States. Of course, the Goon Show was doing it previously, but certainly what they were doing had not a lot of impact except for the people who enjoyed that type of medium. And
well, the English were always into radio, and they still are. Okay, the oral tradition, if I can use that expression in today's charged times, the oral tradition has been alive in England since the Bronze Age, when people are sitting around a fire telling stories, and not so much in America. Once radio was supplanted by television, that oral tradition really kind of went away, and it was taken over by the Hollywood ethos. Looking to moving pictures instead of creating pictures in the mind. But when we got together, we had one tremendously lucky break. There's a guy named John McClure who was one of the suits at Columbia Records. And after we put out our first record, Waiting for the Electrician, or Someone Like Him, in which Glenn Campbell played in the orchestra that you'll hear on the record, Uh, After that record came out, we had a moderate success, but we certainly were not, we didn't break nationally, and they were going to drop us. What's a Fireside Theater? Who are they? And John McClure said, these guys are geniuses. They're going to do incredible things. They've created long-form comedy records that you have to listen to again and again, and I'm going to sign them to a spoken arts contract. Now, that was wonderful for us because it meant we had free, unlimited studio time. That was one of the things about that. But we had to exchange for that a reduced royalty, which is one of the reasons why Firesign Theater, especially back in the late 60s and early 70s, never had a platinum record or anything like that, even though we sold, millions of units. It was at a reduced royalty, and those things were all calculated on money instead of quantity, if I can say so. So anyway, that allowed us to develop our particular approach to comedy. And the other important thing was, this was a record. You could take it home, listen to it in the privacy of your own bedroom, and listen to it over and over again, share it with friends, and it was uncensored, basically. That's why we could use certain kinds of blue language if we felt it was comedically necessary, why we could write the American pageant and use all of the names, the nicknames, the disparaging nicknames that most people talk about minorities with as a comic song, and because it wasn't going to be publicly released. But then something terrible happened. It's called FM radio. When FM radio happened, people started suddenly playing our half-hour-long records on the radio, mainly in college stations and other stations in the Midwest. And suddenly, we found that we had a real national following, and that led to touring all over the country and the creation of so many interesting records over the years. Four of them at Columbia, many beyond that. And then we were with Rhino Records for years, doing a whole new series. I think we've done like 30 records over the time and nominated for Grammys 3 times for our comedy records. So a career happened, and it took me on that ride, even though I continued to do movies and television, through the strange nexus of BBS Productions, the people who produced Easy Rider. A friend of mine from New York named Henry Jaglom, who wrote a play called The Snowball Tree, which is a Russian song. Kalin, kakalin, kakalin, kamaya. He called it The Snowball Tree, and he wrote it for the Actors Studio in New York. And I performed in a production of it with my girlfriend Karen Black, Bonnie Bedelia, Richard Pryor, and various other New York actors. And this play later became a movie called A Safe Place, starring Tuesday Weld, Gwen Wells, Orson Welles, Jack Nicholson, and introducing Phil Proctor. So how did this happen? It happened through BBS Productions, who produced Easy Rider. Why? Because Henry Jaglom edited that movie, okay? And after he did such a nice job editing that movie, the producers at BBS, Bob Rafelson and the others, said, here's $1 million, Henry, make a movie. And that was why I got to do my first movie role, my first major movie role. And I also did, I did television shows like All in the Family and various other Martin Mull show that he did called He and She, and a bunch of television guest star parts in between appearances with Firesign Theater or working in the studio on an album or something, or appearing on the radio. If you go to our website, firesigntheater.com, you will be able to get a lot of books that we've written, the collection of our radio plays, collection of our record transcripts, all profusely illustrated. And there's one book called The Duke of Madness Motors, which is the story of our radio years. we were on something like 7 different radio stations, mostly listener supported, but some of them commercial radio stations. And included in the book is an MP3 of 85 hours of our radio shows. Okay? And also, if you don't know what Firesign Theater is, you can Google us and hear excerpts from our albums or the whole album sometimes. But you can also, there's a radio icon at firesigntheater.com. And if you click on that, you can hear 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, excerpts from our records, our radio shows, and various other obscure and crazy performances that we did.
And so, I think this would be an excellent time for me to go ahead and shill. If you haven't read down into the descriptor, Phil's links are down there. Not only the official website to Planet Proctor, also his Twitter. If you're looking for some Firesign Theater merchandise, there's a link there for you to click. Also to his podcast.
True.
And of course, if you're looking to purchase the book that we've been talking about and waving around, Where's My Fortune Cookie, that is located in the descriptor as well. And,
available in outer space.
and I would certainly suggest to anybody that hasn't taken the time, but those who are hooked into the current wave, because Theater of the Mind has made a huge comeback in the past 4 years or so. With the proliferation of streaming services, especially like what YouTube does and Twitch does, and there are several others out there that actually do it. And I think we're almost out of the MTV generation, where it has to be quick cuts, where it has to be flash in the pan, where people are willing to actually sit down and listen to a story and hear it develop and enjoy the comedy, horror, tragedy, whatever is there in store for them.
Well, what's really happened is that there's been a resuscitation of spoken arts in audiobooks. And by the way, the audiobook of Where's My Fortune Cookie will be released soon, in time for Christmas, and podcasts. Okay, just oral podcasts, so that people can listen on their portable platforms, which now is basically your iPhone, right? Plug in your earphones and you've got access to everything in the world. And of course, you can listen to books on tape and all this stuff. Here in Los Angeles, which is a car culture, like most of American cities are now. If you move the letters of Los Angeles around, it spells legs on sale. And that pretty much epitomizes it. But, when you're sitting in traffic, there's nothing better than listening to a CD or, a recording plugged into your car from your iPhone of a book or a comedy piece or a comedy record or whatever. It's all available. And I think that's been part of the incredible resuscitation of that. Also, my book, Where's My Fortune Cookie, was produced by Sue Zizza on Sue Media as a podcast. Okay, and it's been on the air now. I think it's just finishing up. If you go to podbean.com, you can hear that. So again, it is an exciting new media, old medium that has become kind of reinvigorated by the kind of access that we have. And this is an example of it right now, really, that did not exist before, which is very personal, very private. When Proctor and Bergman did our first album, we called it TV or Not TV. It was in 1972 or something, I don't remember, 76, I don't know. But in that album, we predicted that cable television was going to take over the world. And our motto was, oh no, oh that's right. And when we ran George Papoon for president, his motto was one man, one channel. Okay, which it's become true now. So anyway, so much of what Firesign Theater did, what was predictive, so that when you listen to the albums now, they're fresh. And some of the things that we predicted are just now coming true. I don't have my iPhone with me, unfortunately. at a certain point when you're coughing and shooting up, I will go and get my iPhone because I want to demonstrate one of the cultural effects that Firesign has had along those lines.
Oh, I tell you what, I'm good. If you need to grab a drink of water, I got some fill and chill that I can do for you.
Okay, look, I'll go get my phone so I can amuse you with this amazing thing, and I'll get some water to drink, and I'll be right back.
Sounds great. And I do want to make sure. Now, there was a great point brought up in chat. The fact that I need to list the bios of the people that I interview. And let's just do this real quick. You might have heard his voice or seen him in a myriad of different video games, animation, of course, with his Firesign. But he has a very prestigious history. Those who really like who really like them video gamins, he has done voices in Assassin's Creed. For those who like, well, he's done SOCOM. He was in Marvel Alliance, and there's a ton of them. And of course, a lot of people have brought up the point that he was a major part of Rugrats. And we might be talking about that just a little bit later, because I think Howard DeVille has some additional information that can be shared.
Exciting news.
But yes, you may not have seen his face, but you certainly have heard his voice at one time or another. And
that's Howard DeVille in Rugrats. And there are other pictures here. Dr. Vidic in Assassin's Creed, one of the characters I did in Finding Nemo, the seahorse dad. And what else is in here? Oh, yeah, I did the voice of a chef, among other things, in Spirited Away, a wonderful Japanese Academy Award-winning film. I've shared in a lot of Academy Awards and 3 Daytime Emmys for Rugrats. And the exciting news about Rugrats is we're going to come back with 26 new episodes, next year, and a new CGI movie. So I'm really hoping that will be a hook for me to be able to go out and meet people, go to Comic-Con and things like that, by the reinvigoration and reinvention of the Rugrats story.
Yeah, so for those watching live and for those who are going to be listening on the replay, there is your scoop for this evening. The Rugrats are going to come back, and they're going to come back in style. Now, that does lead me to ask, do you have a preference? Do you prefer stage? Do you prefer film? Or do you prefer your voice work? Now, I know the standard response is anything that pays. But you must have something that really draws you, that you have your preference.
Well, I'm often asked this question. And the fact is, I've been in the show business for almost 70 years. And the reason that I've had such a long and successful career is because I've done everything I could possibly do with my talents. If part of my career dried up, I would be able to use another aspect of my talents, maybe writing, in order to continue to work in the business. And the main thing I got involved with was, here I am suddenly in Firesign Theater. I thought I was going to have a career in musical comedy, basically. And I was in The Sound of Music on Broadway, and I was in The Time for Singing. I got out here with this musical, The Amorous Flea. And yet, once the Firesign Theater happened, and I could sing on records and do whatever I wanted on records, I found that I was doing all these voices, and we were having this great success. And I said to myself, I should commercialize on the fact that I can do these many voices. So I got myself a commercial agent and started doing cartoon voices. The first cartoon I did was the Smurfs. which I think is celebrating International Smurf Day today, along with National Cookie Day.
Now
Okay,
that kind of sounds dirty.
what
International
cookie?
Smurf
Well,
Day.
International Smurf Day. Well, good for you. I'm glad that you mind. But that must keep your wife quite entertained. But anyway, uh, uh, so I started doing cartoons, and I was at the Hanna-Barbera factory where they did everything. I did, guest parts on Scooby Doo and the Flintstones and the Jetsons, you name it. What Little Richie Rich, whatever they were doing. I got a chance to do stuff. But they created a character for me named Prince Gerard on the Smurfs, and then we had a spin-off called Pee Wee and Herman or something. I can't remember what it was called, but I was, this wonderful little character, this prince, and soon I started getting radio commercials, started doing on-camera commercials, and I found that I could exploit my talents in the commercial arena as well as being an underground comic and having this wonderful, bizarre career with the other three guys at Firesign Theater. And then that was augmented by, as I said, guest appearances on shows like All in the Family and other, things, because I was doing theater here in L.A. down at the what's it called, the Center Theater Group, okay, which is still the prestigious theater group in how can I put it, the most prestigious theater group in Los Angeles to this day. And we did things like Monday night at the Mark Taper Forum, where new playwrights like Sam Shepard and older playwrights like Jules Pfeiffer and various other people would write short plays for us to act in. And so I was on the stage there, and that led to roles in things like Cagney and Lacey and The Rookies and various other television programs. So you see, one thing would lead to another, this kind of networking thing. And that sustained my career. Then I got into a thing called ADR, or looping and dubbing. Mm-hmm. Most people who are not in the business don't realize that in every movie that you see, every television show that you see, the background voices and other voices really during the course of the film, the intercom thing, the police stuff, and the, Dr. Kearney, will you show up in the gurney? All of that is added after the fact in post-production to all of these films. And sometimes characters are overdubbed. I mean, our voices are replaced. And sometimes, because the stars aren't available, people who can sound like the stars, like the leads in the movies, do their voices for little things that have been changed in the film. And certainly for any time anybody dies, it's us who scream our lungs out, in films and things. Well, I did that for like 30 years. Okay, when I wasn't doing Firesign, or I wasn't doing on camera, I wasn't doing something in a movie, I did that. And you were talking about people saying, "Oh, you did it for the money." No, not necessarily. I did it for the pension and welfare. I did it for the health program. It was all wonderful union work, and which is sustaining me now in my old age and helping me in very many ways. And I recommend, I'm a union guy in that regard. Well, it's interesting because, as I said, there were no unions when I started in television. And then AFTRA, the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists, was started to cover the burgeoning television industry and the ongoing radio industry. And then SAG, Screen Actors Guild, was started out in Hollywood to, protect the actors and ensure the proper safety measures in films and all that stuff, and overtime and you name it. And we recently, after a long struggle, were able to merge the two unions into SAG-AFTRA. And if you move the letters of SAG-AFTRA around, it spells a gas fart. Which is sometimes what people think the union is. And I'll tell you, one of the revolutions I've been talking about the different platforms that we can express ourselves in now have in many ways undercut the work that the unions have been doing, because whereas normal union work generates what are known as residuals. If I would do a movie, a Pixar movie, a Disney movie, a Warner Brothers movie, you name it, I would then get residual payments every time that project was exploited in any other medium. If they showed it on an airplane, I'd get a residual. If they showed it in China, I would get a residual. And some of these residuals were very healthy, especially the Disney movies and things like that. But sure, for the most part, like this week, I got 2 residuals for voices I did for NCIS New York Special Victims Unit or something. One of them, after taxes, is $1.21, and the other one I think is 34 cents.
Awesome. That's a framing check.
It adds up. No, there used to be a place out here called Residuals, and if you got a residual that was under $1, you could bring it into the bar and you get a free drink. Well, after about 5 or 6 years, there were so many people coming in with these small checks that they had to stop the practice. Okay, but anyway, it is, yes, the money is of course part of it, but the fact that you're being paid at all for something that you love to do has always been a joke to me, and I think to most of the people who love being in the business. In terms of what I like to do the most, I suppose it's actually recreations of old radio shows right now. You know, I love the fact that I'm going to be on the stage again and get an opportunity to polish a performance and investigate a character over a period of time before a live audience. That's wonderful. I love doing that. But it does take up a lot of time and a lot of energy, okay? And particularly now, since I live in the Benedict Canyon area and I have to drive to Glendale to do the show, it's going to be challenging for an old guy like me. But at the same time, I love it, and I will do it as long as I can. I love working with my wife, Melinda Peterson, and when we do old radio shows at radio conventions and other kinds of venues, that is an opportunity to work together. And also, we don't have to learn the lines. We don't have to, wait in a trailer for 3 hours before they call you on. And then you say, we have a half hour, we have to wrap. You don't have to do any of that. You pick up your script, you study your script, you run through your script, you rehearse a little bit, and then you do it before a live audience, and it's wonderful fun, and then you go home, okay? So I still love doing that, and there's actually a wonderful venue called the Here Now Festival in Kansas City, Missouri, where Melinda and I last performed radio stuff. And there you can learn the techniques of doing audio theater, audio books, narration, audio acting. And I've taught courses in that. I'm probably going to teach some in the next one coming up in June. And we just did a thing called the Spurdvac Convention, which was an old time radio convention in Costa Mesa, where we performed the George Burns and Gracie Allen radio show.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I played a psychiatrist in that one, and we also it's a recreation of the real shows. And then we did one. There was a show called The Easy Aces, which is on for 20 years on the radio, written by Goodman Ace, who was like a legend in radio work, along with Norman Corwin, who we got to work with for many, many years until he passed away at 103 or whatever he was. Oh, and in this one, my wife played the ditzy blonde, and I got to play a frazzled judge in a court because she was called for jury duty. And we had a ball. And the audience absolutely loved it. And there's one other place where I've been able to exploit this, and that is, believe it or not, the short stories of L. Ron Hubbard called The Golden Age of Pulp Fiction.
Really?
And over about maybe it was 10 years ago, I got cast in a series to do a series of these audiobooks. I did maybe, scores of characters, all kinds of different accents, French accents and, Russian accents and German accents, Arabic accents, whatever. And then these were released. For those of you who only know L. Ron Hubbard through Scientology,
And
he
Dianetics.
was in Dianetics. Before that, he was a very prolific writer of pulp fiction in all genres. Voodoo stories and arson stories and science fiction stories and pirate stories and cowboy stories. It was amazing. And he wrote under a lot of different pseudonyms and everything. But they decided to put these books on tape and release them in batches, which they've been doing over the years. And I can't tell you how much fun that's been. But here's my point. One of the ways that they promote them is that they have built a theater in Hollywood, the golden age of pulp fiction, L. Ron Hubbard Theater, which is state-of-the-art audio. And on a regular basis, they do recreations of the stories in front of a live audience in a kind of a cabaret setting. And because these stories on the audiobook contained original music, background voices, and sound effects, these are seamlessly worked into our performances in front of microphones with recreating these stories. And they've gone one step farther, which nobody else is doing now. Instead of having to carry scripts in our hands, they have given us teleprompters out in the audience.
Oh, okay.
So the actors are free to perform much more, and we have little costume pieces that we wear and all of that. And it promotes audio theater, the wonder of audio theater. And that's what I kind of dedicated my latter years to doing.
Well, that is, but being a writer in real life, that is one of my big things. I love theater of the mind, and if I may say, I always do research on the people that are coming on the show. Of course, I already knew all the Firesign stuff. I did have a clue on the Rugrats as well. But the thing that I like about your career is that it's incredibly ethereal, which is to say that you can float from genre to genre, you can float from medium to medium, and everywhere that you've gone, you've not only been well received but welcomed. And there are people who are endeared to you, like say for just what you did for Rugrats, and they have no idea that Firesign exists, or they showed up at a play or a musical that you were doing, and they didn't know anything about Rugrats or the video game work that you've done.
Yeah, or the Disney movies or the Pixar movies. It's true.
Yeah, you've literally been appreciated in so many different ways, and I find that I find that to be a career of speechlessness, whereas you've affected so many people, and yet they've only seen the tip of the iceberg unless they really deep dive upon your career. But what does it feel like when you have an effect on somebody, be it, if they're sitting there button mashing, playing a game, or listening to the recordings of Firesign, or seeing you do one of your many character appearances on TV? I mean,
I can answer that in a very special way, which is why I want to get my cell phone. I'm going to say something to Siri now. Here we go. This is Worker speaking. Hello.
Hello, Auckland. What function can I perform for you? LOL.
Now, If you are acquainted with one of the Firesign Theater records called I Think We're All Bozos on This Bus, you would know that Clem, or Clem, because the computer, picked up my stutter, is the main character in the story. He is a disaffected worker who sneaks into the Future Fair, which is a computer-operated fair sponsored by the government to make everybody feel good about everything. And I plant a virus in the mainframe computer, direct readout memory, Dr. Memory, and I'm a hacker, and I bring down the entire Future Fair. Okay, and this particular code, this is worker speaking, hello, is how I hack into the system. Okay, now why, you may ask, is it on this phone? It so happens that Steve Jobs was a big firehead. Now, when I did one of my first Pixar movies, which was A Bug's Life, in which Dave Osman also played a major part, we had a cast and crew screening up at Emeryville. And I met Steve Jobs there because he had bought into Pixar to help them develop their computer animation, okay? And he said, when I met him, I said, I'm a big fan of yours. And I said, well, that's great, Steve. It's nice to hear. Well, a year ago, the Library of Congress purchased the Firesign Theater archives for $500,000. And we were down in Washington and for a big celebration. And David Osman and I, the last surviving members of the group, we did a performance at a beautiful theater in the Library of Congress. And our archivist, Taylor Jessen, was, of course, going through all of our stuff to send to Washington, D.C., where most of it is now. During his investigation of the stuff that we had, he came across some contact sheets of a record signing at a store that we did back in the early 70s, I guess, up in Berkeley. And in those contact sheets, there's this tall, dark-haired, long-haired, bearded, kind of goatee guy talking with us and getting his record signed and everything. And he looked at it and he said, that's Steve Jobs. And it is. So he has actually been a fan from the early years before he had his great success. Okay? So that is always, that's thrilling to me and to all of us, that we've had a cultural effect. One of our most famous records, Don't Crush That Dwarf, Hand Me the Pliers, was inducted into the Library of Congress about 10 years ago now. And that was the beginning of our awareness.
And that must be an amazing feeling. I mean, coming from my aspect as a writer or any type of artist, to be drawn into the Library of Congress, it's immortalizing.
It is. It was Martha and the Vandellas and Jimi Hendrix catalog were also included at our celebration down there. They took us to lunch and a private tour of the library. It was all tremendously thrilling. Now, I do want to mention also that beyond the writing career with the Firesign Theater, I have another writing career. I wrote a political comedy, co-authored a political comedy with a guy named Sam Joseph called God Help Us. The premise of which is that God is so concerned about the imbalance in our world right now because of the conflicting ideas that he brings up two pundits, a Republican pundit and a Democrat pundit, and he puts them in a debate situation in like purgatory and tries to get to the bottom of why there's so much conflict. The part of God is played by Ed Asner. And that play is presently touring the country. And we just got a bunch of dates next year, if we're all still here next year, including one in New Zealand, which will be kind of fun. And so one of my plays is I'm actually getting residual checks from a play that I wrote or co-authored as well. So I understand this. But we, again, the Firesign group, was so incredibly lucky to be able to pursue such a unique form of writing, and to get it out to what I call the bad head cult, to the people in the country who were too smart for most of the stuff they were seeing, and really felt like outcasts because their sense of humor was maybe more absurd than the stuff they were getting. We fulfilled that need for them, and it allowed us to continue to do our writing and to continue to investigate new forms of telling stories with layered sound effects and music and crazy transitions and other things. So again, a very blessed career. Not always totally comfortable, because many times I would have to make a choice between a major motion picture role or a television role that was going to be a pilot shot in Tahiti, and I'd have to turn it down because we were performing some of our material at a little club in West Hollywood, and I felt what's the word I want? A loyalty. I felt a loyalty to the other members of the group and to the movement of our career in that regard. So, there's always a form of sacrifice. All of us, at one point or another, had to sacrifice something to continue the Firesign Theater. But it's that love that kept us together, even after we'd have tremendous fights that would sometimes end up with two of the members not talking for a year. Well, it happens.
Well, and
50-year career.
Well, and here's the thing that I find about the brilliance of Firesign Theater is the fact that there are a lot of layers working, but the crucial thing is you can listen to any one of the records. And yes, I was born in the record generation, so I will say records. And you get right? the humor has not been, for lack of a better phrase, retarded by technology or society. You do skits, you do bits that do translate, and especially since society has cycles, I would because of course most of my viewership is between 25 and 35, so they weren't alive during the.
I'm surprised they were alive at all.
Yeah. They weren't alive during the halcyon days of Firesign, but I always encourage people to go back and listen. And I haven't had a person yet that I've recommended that they haven't come back and said, "Oh, I love this bit," or "I love that bit," or that I understand this, or it seems to be crystal balling things.
Yep.
And I find that amazing. I do spend a lot of time, the people that I speak with, about my whole shtick is you have to flex your pec, which is you have to have passion for what you do. You have to make the effort to do it, and then you have to be committed to see it all the way through. And
True.
I find that in everyone that I speak with, and more so with people like yourself who have been down that road and have been able to not just basically be focused on one thing, but say, hey, I did this, let's try and do this. Or, hey, let's go ahead over here and try that. And I think that is the real moral to the story, if you will, that if you've got passion, if you make the effort, if you're committed to what you're doing, you simply can do anything, even if you believe your life is mostly existential.
Well, this is very true, and the way I also think of it is in terms of one thing that you do informs something else that you do. Experiences that you have with one style of art are going to influence how you approach another style of art that you are evolving in or doing or want to get involved in. People ask me often, how to get involved in doing voiceover work, radio work, things like that. And I say, well, you start on the stage. You start doing theater. You start listening to other actors, and evolving characters, and using not just your body and your mind and your memorization skills, but vocal characterizations as well. So if you're playing an older guy, you got to sound like an older guy, or nobody's going to believe you.
And is there anything better than the high of being on stage?
No, I think there's nothing better than the high of being on stage. I really agree, because it's instant gratification, and it is a vital communication between you and other living human beings who are there to hear a story and to be taken away. It is as old as man. It's mankind itself, really. The idea, people sitting around a fire listening to a story, and in the dark. All right. Mm-hmm. And that's what theater does. It's what movies do. It's what radio does, because you close your eyes and you're in the dark, and you can do it on a one-to-one, because that's all we have. We're totally isolated in our consciousness and our spiritual manifestations and our destinies and our paths. We're alone, but I can get into your head. You can get into my head. I can sit in an audience and feel the community mind.
Yes.
The insect mind. Because we're all there, focusing in a particular way. This place that we're at now, technologically, which, okay, I should start it this way. Marshall McLuhan was a big fan of Firesign Theater. Now, some people may not even know who he is.
Oh, no, I know.
He was the seer who told us about the future of how technology was going to affect us and change us, okay? And we're at a point now, because of this particular form of communication right here, that we are isolated, but we are also now part of a much greater universe. Okay, and it's an odd paradox, and we have to kind of come to grips with it and understand that there's a responsibility that comes with it, and that we have an ability to do a lot of good things from our own private world right now, but we also can create a lot of damage, and we've seen both of these things happen. I think one of the best examples was that couple that colluded with a homeless guy to raise $400,000, in a group thing, whatever they call it, a fundraiser, and duped everybody because of it. Now, they were doing a wonderful thing, ostensibly, right? But they were crooks. You see, and that is all part of this matrix that we find ourselves in now, and we really have to kind of come to grips with it and realize that there's a tremendous responsibility to be honest and loving, and a great opportunity to do so through this new form of connection, social media connection.
Well, we're going to jump into the questions soon here, and I definitely want to make sure that I know Aydin's listening, so if she would like to come back into the call.
Sure, and I'd love to hear from some other people. By the way, the one other ancillary point about that is, because we're isolated and we're not really involved as much as you and I were in our lives with other people. We don't go out riding on bicycles and playing together, and catching fireflies and that. We don't have relatives living with us all the time. Family is not an important part. People tend to identify now with artificial families called maybe political parties. And that's one of the reasons why there's so much opposition in the world now, because people are identifying, they're making their family people who think like they do. And that's, out there. So again, these are aspects that I want people to think about when they are involved in social media, okay? And both be wary, but also be scary.
Yeah, honestly, I would speculate that it's more towards a gang type mentality, really.
Sure, sure, that's true, and that's why you've got an upswing in Nazism and violent um, political opposition people. You know, the what do they call them? The naughty boys? No, they don't call them that. The
Proud
pure
Boys.
proud boys. The proud. I'm a proud boy. I'm gonna beat the crap out of you. You know, and I'll prove it. Anyway, it's dangerous.
Yeah, I mean
So
the spectrum has become uh, amazingly taut and amazingly radical. You know, you have the right wing Proud Boys on one side, you've got Antifa on the other side, and both of them are encouraging violence instead of encouraging some type of conversation to happen.
correct, correct, and of course, again, there's two sides to every coin. We are a binary planet. Everything is yin and yang. It's male and female. It's yes and no. That's what we got. We have to learn the lessons in this particular dimensional manifestation. Sorry, that's what you got to learn. Balance, balance, and in many instances, we know more now about more things and more about politics and more about what people are trying to do in this country than we ever have before. But there's a feeling of powerlessness, you see, which comes out of this isolation. And these are the challenges that we have to. I'm curious with the rest of what's left of my life, I'm curious to see if we can find a healthy balance. And if we can maintain, for instance, our democracy as we've known it, in spite of the fact that we've got a very radical party in control right now, that is rolling everything back.
Well,
So,
and with 78 years, I don't think people understand how much time you've spent with seeing how wide and how broad the pendulum has swung.
well, it's true, but of course, I was raised in a very democratic environment. My father was active politically. My grandfather on my father's side, Robert E. Proctor, was a state senator of Indiana and helped to expose the Ku Klux Klan when he was a judge. And my dad was involved in New York politics and almost ran to be nominated as vice president running mate to a fellow who was running for president of the Democratic Party. So, I mean, I do have a particular liberal perspective and progressive perspective that I've tried to express. But the Firesign Theater really is non-political.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's because what we basically said was, it's your responsibility. It's up to you. It's your responsibility. And by deprogramming people with our comedic brainwashing techniques, we kind of were saying, be liberated. Don't be taken in by the consumerism, the commercialism, the politicization of life. Live your life. Be yourself. Don't be afraid to express yourself. And that's kind of the message that we promoted.
Well, yeah, I mean, because humor can break very many barriers. And that's the thing. It does not have to be politically motivated. I think that's the amazing thing, that a lot of people spend too much time trying to slip a lot of messages in, when if you present the face of a situation and you make fun of it, in that way it allows both sides to draw the humor in, and at the same time be able to laugh at the circumstances and yet consider them.
You're right. And the way I always think of comedy again is, when you're laughing, you're open. You're open and you're exposed. Okay, which is why Asian cultures usually, when they laugh, cover their mouths. They don't want to give away that they're they're open. They're breathing in. And that's why, if you can use comedy in a proper way, it can be a very healing process, because it opens your mind to different ways of looking at things that aren't so bloody serious all the time. And it can liberate you. Your
And
spirit.
I do want to make sure we have brought in, of course, a person I like to call not a YouTube intellectual, but a YouTube scholar.
This is
by the name of Aydin Paladin. And
Eight.
she is definitively a super fan. And she was one of the people who was like, you really have to get them on. And I have to tell this backstory real quick, because I'm very familiar with Firesign. As a matter of fact, I tried to do you as one of my humorous interpretation cuts, but there was nothing out in print at the time, so I was rejected. I was unable to do it because of the fact that when you do a humorous interpretation piece, you have to be able to have a book that has the actual language in it.
I see.
Their book's been out, though, I think, for probably like 10 years at this point.
Well,
no.
But if it was a while ago, yeah.
Well,
40
you know,
years.
I was trying to do this in 1984, so
I mean the commonly available portion of the book online and stuff where you can go buy it easily.
Oh yeah, now. But the big book of plays was put out in like in the 70s.
Right, yeah.
It's been revised now and expanded, but no, we made our transcripts available as early as we could, and we're continuing to do so. The new books are really histories of certain eras, like the Fighting Clowns of Hollywood, which Dave Ospen has written, which is a new one, is about that particular time when we were writing, what the culture was like, you know, what our relationship was like. And that's an album, by the way, the Fighting Clowns album, that the artwork is by the late great Phil Hartman. Okay, which some people know. I
did read that. That was amazing.
So anyway, yes, but I understand what you're saying, and you're not the first one who has performed Firesign Theater in a dramatic context or contest context.
Okay,
but I've talked enough. Let me answer some questions.
Well, and I do have to say this, that having that unavailable to me, I actually pulled a cut from Goon Show. And that took me to nationals.
Good. I mean, Goon.
But I still, it's so funny because I won a lot of tournaments with the National Forensic League. I did Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I also did the dreaded batter pudding hurler from Goon Show. But I missed because I I will put my hand on a stack of Bibles, even though I'm not religious, that what I really wanted to do was Nick Danger.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. You stupid fool. You did not get a chance to do it, you idiot. I'm ashamed. Well, one of the early influences on me was Beyond the Fringe. Remember Beyond the Fringe?
Oh, my.
With Dudley Moore, Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, all those wonderful people.
Oh, yeah.
That was like a precursor to the Monty Python people, okay? And of course, we've been called the Monty Python of America, and we've been called the Beatles of comedy by the Library of Congress. So the English influence on us, again, because of the oral tradition and because of their long history of really crazy comedy, and an eccentric sense of humor, and their love of eccentricity was one of the things that inspired us on our path, and obviously yourself as well. I'm so sorry.
Well, I will be honest with you. I think that that Goon Show set the foundation, but you guys pushed it quite a bit forward to where I think Monty Python honestly would not have been Monty Python if they weren't influenced by the both of you.
Yes, it's true. And when our paths have crossed, John Cleese and some of the other boys as well, a chance to sit and talk together and everything, we both acknowledged the influence of our work and their work on both of the groups. Of course, they had the great advantage of being able to be visual and to be on television. And besides, they're absolutely wonderful, unique geniuses in what they do. And we could not have been happier that it happened because it also drew attention to our own kind of absurd comedy, and one thing, helped another.
Well,
So,
yeah, I read an interview with Graham Chapman,
oh,
which was done in about I'd say the mid '80s,
mhm.
and they were like, "Well, if you really want to check our inspirations, go here." And it was Goon Show, and it was Firesign Theater.
Yeah, it's very flattering and wonderful, really.
Well, but it's incredibly deserved too. Now, of course, I know we're starting to get questions into the chat. Aydin, I know.
I had no idea my camera was on that whole time before. Whoopsie, because I have no makeup on and I look like a hot mess. However, Phil, I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you a question you won't be able to answer.
All right.
Something the leprechauns asked me back when I was a sprout in Indiana has always puzzled me.
Mhm.
Why does the porridge bird lay his egg in the air?
Because all the trees have been cut down.
I've always wanted a real answer to that question, but sincerely,
Yeah.
something
Forestation. Where is the poor bird going to land?
something that is amazing to have an actual answer to the question. But
And by the way, Aiden, the corollary to that is that when the bird lays its egg in the air, it's going to fall onto the ground, and there will be no more porridge birds. That's why you don't see them, outside of your window laying eggs. They're
it's
dead.
very true.
Sure.
It's very true.
Now, I do want to make sure and give Aydin the time, because she was the one who really inspired me to say, yeah, go ahead and try to get on the members of Firesign. And I do have to say, next week we're going to be talking with David Osman, and
Wonderful.
he was the one who came to me and said, listen, we've had big careers. I'll be happy to share the stage again with Phil, and but you might want to consider the fact of our careers. And I'm like, I felt like a total idiot, because I'm like,
No.
are you kidding me? Yes, these have to be separate interviews, because of the
Yeah.
fact that there is legitimately the things that both of you gentlemen have done can fill up a 2-hour time slot without any problem. And
It's true. I do think you're flattering yourself by calling yourself a total idiot. I think you're just an idiot. And that's, for me, the total tool. Okay? But you're right.
Kicked off. Whoops.
Yeah, you're
Sorry.
right. And also, we have different perspectives on what has happened. David kept diaries, for instance, and has a much better memory of when things happened and all of that. I tried to do it in the book. I tried to make it clear when certain things were happening, but it was a struggle. I had to go back into my little day books and things, and I'm not really sure of all the chronology. I decided to put it together psychically instead, which is the way that I experienced it. So, there you go. It still is my story, and David will have an even more fascinating personal story of his own to tell.
well, and here's the thing, Aydin is a very popular YouTuber. She's very scientific in the things that she does. She breaks down a lot of sociological issues,
Mm.
and she came to me very early and was like, this is a major influence. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've listened to Firesign, and I'm like, okay, how does this correlate? And that's the one thing. Aydin, if you wouldn't mind, can you talk a little bit about your influence, or how you were influenced by Phil's work?
When I was a kid, my dad and I my parents got divorced. And so when I was probably from the age of about 4 or 5, would be on very long car rides to and from my mom and dad's places.
Mhm.
And that's how I came to discover the magic of audio content, of radio content. And something that I've struggled with my whole life is that when I would listen to, stand-up or comedy records from that time, and it wouldn't, just be Firesign, it would also be things like, oh geez, like the Mad stuff or the, what did they do? Shoot.
Well,
National Lampoon.
National Lampoon, yeah, which I wrote for and performed with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would just listen to those over and over again. And then something that I found is so ubiquitous across everybody who likes Firesign is that we almost have an unspoken language across each other, in that I can be like, shoes for industry, compadre, and anyone who knows will know exactly what I'm talking about. But if they don't, it doesn't necessarily come off as too crazy of a thing to have said. So it's this sort of hand signal.
It's a secret language in many ways.
Secret language,
Sure.
yes.
Sure. Is your husband, was he a Firesign fan? Is he a Firesign fan?
He is now. He is now. Because,
Good answer.
well, I introduced it to him, and he came to like it very quickly. And so now we'll sometimes just, we'll be talking, and then we'll go into a reference, and it's again, it's an unspoken language, or it's a secret language of, I know what he means, but anyone listening in on it might not. That's just how I grew into it, though, was listening to my dad, listening to it with my dad, I should say. And the surrealness and the complexity of the jokes, which is something that you... Oh, and the other thing that you were mentioning a lot when you're talking about radio is that just audio stuff gives the listener, I think, so much ability to make their own world within their mind.
Yeah, I call them movies in the mind.
Oh yeah,
I just
theater
don't
of
think
the
we get that
mind.
anywhere else.
Theater of the mind,
Right.
movies of the mind. Right, absolutely.
We
Sure.
just don't get that when someone says, when I've tried to show it to the people in my generation, I'm 28 now, but when I've tried to show it to people in my generation, they go, that's boring. I don't know what it is. And where are the pictures? I'm like, well, the pictures are in your head.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
That's what I find great about
there's
it.
really too much to the. I have to say it. The whole Michael Bay image, where you have to be force fed jump cuts, 3-second images, falling into other images, and I think there is. I don't want to say renaissance, but a revival in the fact that you can sit back and listen to something and you will get greater impact. Just like when they were comparing between black and white movies and color movies. Black and white movies have always had the greater effect because, of course, you're filling in the colors in your mind. And and I believe that's, I replayed, because, of course, being the diligent researcher that I am, I replayed about 12 or 14 hours of Firesign. And you guys have an
talk about it.
Well,
you live to talk about it, right?
well, you guys have an incredibly detrimental effect because I can't keep my mind focused on what I'm supposed to be doing while playing you guys in the background. I had to sit there and listen. Yeah, it's just the crispness, the suggestiveness, the colorfulness of what you were saying in the words would basically draw me out of anything. When I was trying to type up an introduction to this, I was completely roadblocked because I would fall straight back into the words. I would fall straight back into the performances. And, it's... I think it's not a difficult thing nowadays, even though a lot of people are hooked into the video game thing where you have to see it to feel it. I think with Firesign, and once again, I do recommend this to everyone in the chat, just to sit back and pull any Firesign Theater gig at random and see if you don't get drawn in.
Yeah, as I say, if you go to the website and you click on the radio icon, you'll just hear at random some of our radio riffs, because basically our radio shows were like four jazz musicians sitting around gigging, okay? And somebody would come up with a piece of written material or a funny idea, and then the three of us would play off of it, or we'd come in with a script for everybody that nobody rehearsed, put their roles in front of them, and then start doing it. And we had a guy named Earl Jive, our engineer, who would drop sound effects and music in randomly that we then had to respond to. So that was the way that we started to work together. And then when we started writing albums, because the people were buying them, we would take our material and put it on stage at the Improv. No, at the Ash Grove, which is now the Improv in Hollywood, in West Hollywood. And we would try the material out like the Marx Brothers used to do in front of a live audience and then define it. But because we could go into the studio whenever we wanted, we could write or bring some material in that was maybe like the first third of an album, and then listen to it and go back and write it again, being informed by what we had already done. And that's why the albums, as dense and as crazy as they are, seem to have a certain cohesiveness to them, because we could build them in a leisurely manner. It was like the Beatles figuring out that they could go in and spend a couple of days in the studio working on one beautiful song. They didn't have to go in, as it used to be traditionally, and do their numbers, record each song that they had been playing as a recording session. They could create it in the studio, okay? And so they were also influenced by that kind of revolution that was open to us all.
And I'll say my two biggest live regrets was not being able to see the Ramones live and not being able to see Firesign when they were touring live.
Oh, too bad. Yeah, we did some very interesting shows. We did some very big shows. There was one tour where we had, a truck with a pyramidal set in it and all kinds of special effects. When we broke the president, flash pots would go off and everything. And then other times we would do smaller shows. And at the end, near the end, we basically would go in with our scripts, standing in on the radio in the studios, right? and we could also therefore throw in modern material. When we were doing our hits, our greatest hits, we would sometimes upset our audiences because it wasn't the way it was on the record. Okay, we might have found something more funny, or we might have updated something, and the fans would get upset. Well, that's not the way it is on the record. He said, we wrote the record. It's not,
Well, yeah, but that's the thing, because I got reports back, and I hated myself because I missed the buzz, because to me is when. Now, I know you guys did some tightly scripted stuff, but you had the ability to flex out and do some improv with it. And that's what I really wanted to see. I wanted to see that live. And I know currently right now with the San Diego Comic-Con, one of the things that they do is they get a lot of voice actors together, and they will read spec scripts, or they will get together and read out some other scripts, and they'll go ahead and they'll improv and they'll flesh out on them. And I'm looking forward to getting a boot disc of or a boot tape of you showing up to one of these conventions and tearing it up. I'm surprised I haven't found one yet.
Well, I went to the London Comic-Con, and I also went to the San Diego Comic-Con, but nobody was interested in me because all the stuff that I'd done was not current, and that's really, you have to be in something that's hot, either one of the new Rude cartoons that's on, or Futurama or something like that. And I didn't have that advantage. I just had a body of work from the past.
Well,
I'm hoping that, if I do get involved, it's going to be because Rugrats creates some excitement again, and maybe we'll be promoting it that way. I hope so.
You don't think that Rugrats is going to have that renaissance? I believe I believe it's going to, without a question.
But I want to mention one thing. What you say about the improv aspect. Pardon me. Let me clear my throat. is absolutely clear. True. My throat is clear. Is absolutely true. But we actually used to do that in the studio too. We would struggle over a piece of material that we were writing in one of our records. And finally we'd say, okay, look, let's just take it in and let's do it as it is. Okay, all right, okay, we'll do it. And then when we start recording, sometimes we'd throw the script away and write as we were speaking because we got it when we were actually doing it. Whereas when you're sitting in a room writing, even though we would play and, off of one another, or even when you're performing doing a skit in front of an audience, it isn't the same as being in the studio with earphones on, listening in your head to your other actor friends doing voices and whatever. And it would liberate us in a way that we could allow our improvisationary talents to take over and augment and often solve some of the problems that we were facing. Well, so you're right.
Well, and this is one of the reasons why I will create controversy by saying that listening to the records, listening to the recordings of Goon Show, listening to the recordings of Monty Python, you can feel the organic nature in Firesign Theater more so than the other two that I've just mentioned. And I think that's what brings out the actual brilliance of what you've done. And honestly, I think when time tells the tale, that there will be the better recognition for Firesign Theater than there is currently. But I'm safe in the fact that I can sit back and listen to a Firesign recording, and I can hear that passion that comes from the improvisation, to where it kind of almost sounds like the actors that are in the scene are kind of holding back laughs themselves.
It's true. It's true. We did have to do that. The brilliance of Python is their exquisite writing. And the fact that they performed their material so pervasively and persuadingly and so comedically and so fully. So, we kind of marvel at their technical proficiency in doing, which is an English tradition. All of the great comics and comic shows and everything are exquisitely written and intellectually designed pieces, performed implacably. That's not the word I want. Brilliantly, immaculately. And that's the tradition again, the oral tradition that is so strong in England. In America, it's much more loosey-goosey. It's more jazz-like. It's more improvisationary. Sure. And people expect that. And they expect the element of surprise and the element of camaraderie that comes out of working together to create a comic effect or a dramatic effect. And that it's a very accurate observation.
Yeah, there's a certain stiffness to it, definitely. Aydin,
if I could just interject very quickly. I think one of the things is that because the work of Firesign it sort of incorporates some of that, as you were saying, the British complexity, in addition to some of the more American silliness, offhandedness, will mean that I think that even if people don't necessarily understand it right now, because we're in a very visual age, that and particularly considering that Don't Crush That Dwarf was inducted into the Library of Congress, this is going to be something that I think people many years from now will appreciate more and more. And as we, become inundated with virtual reality and all this other stuff, that the capacity for the human imagination will become more appreciated over time, and we'll come to imagine our own worlds with maybe just a little bit of help or a little bit of leading. I think it will come back. I think it will become appreciated again, and I think that it's the thing that maintains why Monty Python has maintained popularity, and I think that it will mean that always Firesign will maintain popularity and a really beloved place in the Gestalt.
That's very sweet of you to say. No, it is very sweet of you to say, and it is true because we have a fandom that has supported us, fanning the flames, if you will, of Firesign, and continues to support us, and we do recruit new people who find our comedy and get it and find it as contemporary as it was when we wrote it, because we were all futurists. And so it does live on in a very particular and peculiar manner. And who knows, maybe there will be a recognition of us. I know that when I watch a show like The History of Comedy, and I don't see Firesign Theater mentioned at all, I go like, what's that all about? And it's really about the fact that we did this so early in the evolution of recorded comedy that it's kind of been forgotten by a lot of people, because 50-year career, 55-year career, that's a long time to be popular, and it's a long time away from when we were first revolutionizing comedy recording techniques. We were called the jesters of the rock generation. People marketed us as though we were a rock band. Okay, so that was a different era, and it was an entirely different opportunity to reach people. A lot of people from the Vietnamese War period have said to me that Firesign Theater saved my life.
Wow.
Because they were over there in Nam, and they would find a Firesign Theater record in a shipment of children's records that had been sent over, right? And they put it on and go, wow, man, this is wow, this is a reason to live. And and that's very comforting too. So anyway, we've had an influence, we're still having an influence, and I'm very proud of my association and involvement in it to be a quarter of this extraordinary journey that we were on.
Well, and Entertainment Weekly published the 30 greatest comedic acts of all time. And if I'm not mistaken, I might be because I have brain damage, you were ranked above National Lampoon. And I can see direct effect of what you guys did as to what National Lampoon built off of. So legitimately, as far as your comedy goes, it was foundational. It was a bridge to what Goon Show had started. It has definitively inspired Monty Python, and it even what's his name, Michael O'Donoghue had cited you guys as a reference, and it's something that doesn't need to be lost. And I always have my preferences, my biases, and I'm okay with that because I'm just a regular, normal human being. But I think if you can't find comedy in the things that you did with Firesign Theater, you have no sense of humor.
I think there's a lot of genetically deprived people out there who do not have the humor gene today, especially, and it's a real shame. But again, it's one of those things that if you tune in to us or to George Carlin, for instance, and there are some contemporary comedians who are doing some pretty interesting and daring stuff too.
Carlin, Pryor, Lenny Bruce.
Oh, sure. But again, we're talking of comedians of the past now. I want to see Ellen DeGeneres' new show. She's done a stand-up show. I want to see what she brings to the table now.
I'm going to see someone named Christina Pajitsky, who I love, in about 2 days. But what I would say is that both Weird Al and Penn Jillette have left reviews on your recent book. Yes, so they cite you as major, inspirations or origins of why they became comedians and entertainers.
That's right, and they're inspiring to me now, and they're still friends. And and I admire tremendously their careers and what they bring to the table, and that's very true. And I try to keep my eyes open and my ears open to new voices, but it's increasingly difficult because I'm still so involved in aspects of my own career that I don't have a lot of time to catch up with everything.
Well, can I say I would just love to have a crack at your little black book. the people that you have talked to, and honestly, the whole premise of Doctor on Call is talking to interesting people who have interesting lives, and I don't know if I can find. I've talked to some interesting people, but I will say I was on pins and needles when I was like, well, what am I going to talk to this guy about? There's so much a positive
Can't
influence
lose.
that you've had on everything, and
Well,
that's undeniable. Literally the whole ethereal quality of being able to go wherever you want and to make an impact is just an amazing thing. And I have to say this. I apologize to the chat. They've been loading up questions, and I will try to knock these out. I know you've got a schedule, so I'm going to try to get these out as quickly as possible.
I don't have a schedule. I'm absolutely at your cervix right now. No offense. And I tomorrow I rehearse. I go in and rehearse, and so fine. I'd love to play. I'm doing fine.
And if I may, just as a boomer geek, if you're allowed to, I think it would be awesome to see a YouTube channel from Phil Proctor just about his life. 5-10 minute videos, what you're doing now, what you're into, or just something that you want to talk about, because honestly, I don't want anything lost from the experiences of your life, because I think they're incredibly valuable.
This is all very, very sweet of you to say. Again, it's a question of time. I'm busy. My life is busy and fulfilling. My daughter and my two grandchildren live 5 minutes away from me, and they're part of my life. I have a wonderful wife and a wonderful life with her. I'm still involved in the theater. I'm still doing all kinds of things. And basically, it means that if I had to sit down every day or even week and do a podcast, I didn't have to be produced.
Oh, no. I'm not saying a podcast. Just a slice of life.
Here's a studio.
Like wifey at one of your rehearsals, or just sitting down.
There was a guy once who wanted to just follow me around and record my life, and I said, no, it's too complicated. I don't need that. But maybe it's time for me to call him up and say, okay, I'm ready.
Well, yeah, stalkers can be a good thing.
Well, I would love to have you on my channel at one point. Probably, sure. If you would like to. I mean, I'm a massive Firesign. I think that I have probably about 150 videos up. I'm about 80,000 subscribers, and I can't think of a single video I've put up in my 2 years of doing this that hasn't included a reference to Firesign. So,
well, I'd be happy to play with you.
Sure.
And by all means, you know how to get in touch with me. So,
I will hook you up because more people love Aydin than they love me, but
sure.
But I think honestly, I think she's going to get you to the point where you guys will get so in depth that it's going to cause me a brain cramp as a boomer.
Well, listen, for one thing, I collaborated with Jamie Alcroft of Mac and Jamie fame, who had his own television program for 2 years on CBS. The Mac and Jamie show was called Comedy Break, blah blah blah. But he and I did about 100 videos called "Boomers on a Bench," which you can you can find them online. And "Boomers on a Bench" was in essence two old farts sitting on the bench, reading the newspaper, commenting on what's happening in the world. Okay, and we have, it's on YouTube, so it's you can just go "Boomers on a Bench." You'll find it. I'm sure you'll get a kick out of it. He's, of course, right now in New York celebrating the success of his beautiful daughter, Haley Kiyoko, who is presently getting an award, I think, either tonight or tomorrow night from Billboard as one of the emerging artists of the century.
Wow.
She was just featured on the Today Show this morning, in fact. And so anyway, but that's just an aside. I
Well,
do want to mention two of the other influences on my comedy: Bob and Ray and Ernie Kovacs.
oh my God, I love Ernie.
And Bob and Ray, because they ridiculed, well, they didn't ridicule, they parodied normal people and normal interviews and normal radio and soap operas and all of that stuff with a wonderful kind of a deadpan approach. And Ernie Kovacs, because he was the first real surrealist on television. And they both had a tremendous influence on me.
Ernie, you know, this is the first time we'll drop the F-bomb. Ernie mind fucked audiences, and he was amazing doing it.
I guess I would ask too. What about sort of radical comics at the time when the Comics Code Authority was in place, and so getting like a crazy comic like Felix the Cat would have been that kind of stuff.
Or like Freak Brothers and Mr. Natural.
Yeah, Freak Brothers.
Yeah, but not to the same extent. I was attracted to surrealism in both visual surrealism and audio surrealism from certain personalities. Is the only way I can explain it. I love Steve Allen. He was a wonderful, crazy, inventive, surprising host for late night television. You know, but I didn't pursue comedy records per se or things like that. I would listen to the blooper records and find them more amusing than a stand-up record because it was people making mistakes on television or on radio that were funny and uncensored. You know, I liked the Crepitation Contest, which was a famous record about a farting contest in Canada done by two Canadians who did all the voices for this wonderful, funny thing. Crepitation Contest, you can still hear it, you know, and it was I wouldn't say it was shocking at the time because they were talking about farting and making farting noises and everything, but it was brilliantly produced to sound like a legitimate farting contest that was being broadcast. That appealed to me. I liked that sense of reality, getting laughs out of distorted reality. That's what appealed to me more than people coming up and saying funny things. You know what I mean?
Well, and let's throw in our first question from the chat because they're stacking up. John Doe asks, when starting a voice acting career, who are the sideline helpers or people actors to contact to get started with their first gig? And I know this is something that you've kind of already answered.
Yeah, it depends where you are and what's happening. You can, if you want to get into voiceover acting, you can, as you did, Doc, get into radio in some capacity, right?
Oh yeah,
because you're going to be talking on the radio.
Well, yeah, but most of my gigs were like free Reeboks with a purchase.
Sure, well, all of that stuff. But it's a very difficult question to answer because here we are. I'm in Hollywood, basically. I could recommend all kinds of schools to go to learn how to do voiceover acting and cartoon acting and all of that, and to tell you how to put together a tape. Well, you don't call it a demo. MP3 or something that you can post and try to get an agent, you know, or to just do non-agent work, which is what's destroying the agency's careers right now. It's a complicated thing, but you said you have to have the fire in the belly, and if you do, you will find a way to pursue your desire. And I say, again, if anybody wants to get involved in the voiceover industry, they should start with theater, okay? Because that can lead to connections with other actors who might have careers, commercial careers, or other kinds of careers that can give you advice or introduce you to somebody.
Yeah, I'm not giving anything away, but we're negotiating with Rob Paulson and Jess Harnett and Jim Cummings to come onto the show.
Oh, that would be great. They're all pals of mine, and I worked with them all. I did with Jim Cummings. I did the crazy, what's it called? The Tasmanian Devil, the Tasmanian Devil show. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
He was a Tasmanian Devil. I was the head of the Bush Rats and the king of the Bush Rats, and I was Mr. Koala, Mr. Koala, an Australian character as well. Mr. Wallaby, that's what he was. Mr. Wallaby, Australian character, and we did that for many years. And then I played the Orson Welles tape, which you may know or not know of.
Are you talking the Peas tape?
Say it again. I didn't
Are
hear
you talking the Peas tape?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I played that for them at one of the sessions, and Maurice LaMarche, who did a killer imitation of Orson Welles, memorized it and began performing it during breaks, and that's where Pinky and the Brain came from.
I would like to get Maurice on too. I think I really we've had so far Dan Hammond and Kyle Hebert on, and
I see these other people I've had a longer career with. So Rob and I worked together on what was it called? The Tick, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Tick. And did you know that the Firesign Theater did one of the episodes of The Tick?
I did not.
I did, but I'm a bit of a weirdo.
And because they were fans of Firesign, and I have an action figure based on one of the characters I did on The Tick. Do you know what character it is?
I'm gonna have Aydin try to answer that.
Do you know that one?
I actually don't remember the character's name. Geez. Because I haven't seen an episode of The Tick in forever. What is the character's name?
The Chair.
Oh,
The Chair.
shoot. Okay.
There is an action figure. Of course, there's not much action from a chair.
Right. Yes.
But I have an action figure of me, of the chair. You
mean Chairface Chippendale?
Was that his name? I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, Chairface Chippendale.
Did he have a name even?
I just know it's the chair, but that's all. I can't remember. I have done so much over such a long career that it's really difficult to always remember everything. I do want to mention. You mentioned Dr. Vidic in the Assassin's Creed series. I recently recreated that character as a host for what is going to be an online tournament of another game, very popular game.
Really?
International worldwide game, yes. It's gonna happen in December. I can't tell you what it is or they'd kill me, but it is another game that decided to use Assassin's Creed as a character reference for this tournament. That's about all I know. I know what I did. I know what my recording sessions were like, and it was very funny and very interesting. But there's a resuscitation of the Assassin's Creed character. That's fun.
Brilliant. And honestly, I will admit right up front that I'm not a gamer, but I do love to hook into people who do voices. I've always been a fan of watching people develop characters with their voices and being able to create the atmosphere, because like I've said previously, there's a lot of people who are just trained on the jump cuts, on the quick cuts, but I think if people took a step back and spent the time to actually see the vocal talent, I will say right up front that people who do voiceovers are not just people who do voiceovers; they are actually actors. One of the people that I've been trying to get on is Mark Hamill, and he is a great example of somebody who acts a voice.
Yes, and a nice guy too. I'm sure he'd enjoy talking with you.
Well, it's my whole deal is, and I'm used to this because I've done it for a long time, of getting through all the gatekeepers.
Oh yeah, sure, that's true.
I suppose you could talk though about with that kind of comment about voice acting about Bergman, because his female voice was so amazing and unique.
I don't know. Phil's female voices were much better.
Oh, well, that's very sweet of you to say. Thank you very much. The fact is that on the Nick Danger record, all of us did the voice of Nancy at one point. Okay.
I'll have to re-listen to it. You all did Nancy? Nancy, aka how many names does she have?
Audrey Farber.
Audrey Farber. Yeah.
No, but we did, because there was one scene where the time machine had brought us all together.
Right.
And so instead of overdubbing it, we just all assumed Nancy's voice. Whoever was free to do it. And well, if you listen, you'll.
Oh, Nick. Yes. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was everybody.
That's amazing.
No, there's one scene where you'll hear Bergman do Nancy, and maybe Austin do, and maybe David do Nancy. Anyway, it was a fun hodgepodge. And that record, of course, if anybody really wants to start with Firesign Theater, they should listen to Nick Danger, Third Eye, America's Only Detective.
Do you think so?
Because it's the most accessible. It's the most.
I have always told people it's We're All Bozos. Because I think that it's the most accessible. When you listen to Waiting for the Electrician as a total album, it's a little bit stoner-ish at points, as you know. I don't know what I'm talking about. There's some of the Welcome to the Crazy Dude Rand's Electric Love Farm. I think that might be a little bit disconcerting to people who are complete newcomers. So I've always recommended Bozos just as a general album, but I think you're right that Nick Danger as this microcosm is probably here's the thing, people and Doc, you would know this too.
Mm-hmm.
People in my age range and younger, they don't even understand what a radio drama is. So they wouldn't know what Nick Danger is parodying.
Interesting.
Well, but still, Nick Danger is parodying noir, and noir has had a big comeback recently.
Yeah, all I can say is that at the time, it was because it was parodying the detective radio shows, the detective movies, the noir movies, the classic hard-boiled American detective, the stories, all the detective stories and novels, Raymond Chandler and all of that. It was very pertinent to the generation that we were playing to, and that's what got them into Firesign Theater. Bozos is about the computer generation, and that's why Steve Jobs fell in love with it, and has honored it on the iPhone, because it predicted the computer revolution. And maybe that is still, that we're still in the middle of it, so maybe that's why that would be more pertinent to your generation, which is fine.
I think you're completely correct. I think that's why the way in for people who are 20 or thereby get into Bozos, because it seems prophetic almost in many ways, and it is prophetic in many ways, whereas in terms of the humor and understanding the world that you guys created is probably best through Nick Danger as an introduction.
By the way, Aydin, do you want to say hi to your dad?
Is he actually in the chat? He might be. My dad might actually be in the chat, or my mom, both, because I told them about this. I grew up listening to your stuff, particularly. All I can say is that we recently had Thanksgiving, and my Thanksgivings as a child were mostly spent sitting around the table with my dad and Godfather, and we would just sit around repeating lines from Firesign albums to each other, to the dismay and disgust, I think, of my mom.
Very sad. Very sad. Well, and as we say, not responsible. Parking lot.
Well, and I think that's one of the things because, um, like I was saying, when I was competing in speech, I tried to find. I scoured the universe to try and find a written copy of anything Firesign, and I could not find it. And my default
Buy it.
was
They do
Monty
have it on their
Python and
website.
Goon
It
Show.
is.
Yeah, but there wasn't a website then, maybe, right?
Right.
You know, you didn't have the tools that you've got now to research things.
Oh, sure.
And find stuff. I understand that. You know, you have to go into a bookstore and say, "You got anything by the Firesign Theater?" And the guy would look in his catalog and say, "Yeah, there's this big book of plays and the Big Mystery Joke Book. You know, both printed up in Berkeley." And you know the books were distributed and sold, and you know lots of pictures and everything. But you had to really do a search, and you had to know where to look. Now, listen, it is 7:30. I can give you a little more time, but I do have to rehearse tomorrow, and I don't want to be exhausted.
Gotcha.
So, have you got any other really pertinent questions?
I will try to burn through the chat questions here.
Take a look.
The question: in your experience, how many voice actors hate listening to their own voice, and what do they do to get past it?
No. Voice actors have to listen to their own voice, and it isn't their own voice. Voice actors create different characterizations. If you listen to your own voice, it's almost to say like, okay, I've used that voice. What other voice can I come up with? Okay, so it is part of art that you are involved in to be able to listen to your voice and determine from that objectively what works and what doesn't, and how that voice might epitomize a character. I know that when I was first learning commercial voice acting, doing radio commercials and things, I had to learn how to do that because I could do funny voices and I could do parody characters and things, but I had to do straight characters like you were doing, Doc, when you read one of these commercials you had to do.
Oh yeah.
I had to learn how to sound sincere, and not funny or not cynical or anything like that. And it was a technique that I had to learn. And now what happens to us very often is voice actors. We have to listen to our voice in order to determine what it was we sounded like if we return to a role after a year, for instance. Assassin's Creed was like that. The Dr. Vidic character, I had to listen to listen to an excerpt from the last episode of Assassin's Creed to get back into the rhythm and the sound and the placement of that particular character. Okay,
finding your groove.
Yeah, you have to find your groove. And to the contrary of what the question implies, actors like Maurice LaMarche and others would sometimes carry in a tape recorder with what was then a cassette tape on it of a character that they wanted to do or that they were doing to refresh their memory and put it into their voice so that they could return to the character. So you have to be able to do that. There are actors who don't like to watch themselves on screen, and there are actors who don't like to hear their own voice. But those are people who are not voice actors, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just aren't. And I learned early on when I did the movie A Safe Place, our director, Henry Jaglin, wanted us to look at the dailies, which would be yesterday's filming, so that we could see how we looked on screen, how our characters were coming over. And so I learned quickly to get over any kind of insecurity regarding that and to look objectively at the work that I was doing so that it helped inform me the next day in front of the camera.
I really need to slide in one of my questions because, I'm that kind of girl. I was wondering if you'd talk just a little bit about Sharon Tate.
Well, okay. And this may be what we can wrap it up on. The book, Where's My Fortune Cookie? It has on it a picture of Peter Bergman and me under a table in a Chinese restaurant because we survived the Golden Dragon Massacre in San Francisco, which was at the time in 1975 the worst mass shooting in American history. 5 killed, 11 wounded. And Peter and I were there. And it's a long story, and it's an exciting and interesting story, and it's in the book.
Well, yeah, make them buy the book.
But yeah, I want them to buy the book, and they'll enjoy the book. It will inspire them and scare them. But the point is that entire event was predicted to me by a psychic friend of mine who told me I'd be involved in a shooting, a gangland shooting with foreigners. People would be killed and wounded around me, as was the guy who brought us in. He was wounded. He still carries a machine gun bullet behind his knee.
Wow.
Okay. But that Peter and I would escape unscathed. The Sharon Tate story is somewhat similar. I did a movie, A Safe Place, in New York. Before I went back to L.A., just for the fun of it, I went to see a psychic at the Dakota. And I asked her a question about my father, who had just passed away. And she said he's learning needed lessons. And then she went on to say, you're going to go back home and you're going to meet a little blonde ice skater and you're going to marry her. And I did. I go back to LA, I go to a party, I meet a girl named Sheila Wells, cute as a button. And we fall for one another and we have an affair, we move in with one another, and I learn that she was a champion figure skater, ice skater. And she was supposed to go on a plane over to Czechoslovakia to qualify with the team for the Olympics. And instead of doing that, she decided she wanted to be an actress. And so she said, I'm not going to go. That's the plane that crashed and killed everybody on board. When she was studying as an actress and under contract at Universal, her roommate was Sharon Tate. And they later got a house in, where would you call it? In Beverly Hills, which happens to be across the street from where I work out at my gym, which I didn't know until I wrote the book. And the night of the murders, Sharon was supposed to come over to Sheila's for dinner. And she called up and said, it was a hot day. The baby's been kicking around, and we have a friend coming in, an unexpected friend coming in to stay with us. So we're going to just order Mexican food and we're going to stay in. Why don't you come and join us? And Sheila said, well, I can't because I have another friend coming over for dinner. Jay Sebring was the friend who was coming over. And he said, I'll call you later. So after dinner, she calls the house, can't get through. And she does emergency intervention, which you could do in those days. And the operator says, there's something wrong with the lines. They're down. So Sheila calls Colonel Tate, Sharon's father, and says, there's something wrong at the house. And by then, the police were already there, and they knew that everybody had been slaughtered.
Oh.
So she escaped death twice. And Sharon would have escaped death and had a child if she just, gone and had dinner with Sheila instead. And I've been working with Samantha Egger, who is a lovely actress.
Sure.
Who had a great career. She did the original Dr. Dolittle movies.
Mm-hmm.
I, of course, am the drunken French monkey in the Dr. Dolittle movies with Eddie, but that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, I was talking about this at one point at a recording session we were at. And she said, I was renting that house at the time. I said, what? She was leasing that house from this guy who I knew. And she had sublet it to the producer can't remember his name. It's an M name. The producer who had turned down Manson for a record contract, and it was that person that they were out to kill. Okay, the record producer who was no longer there, because the house was then rented to Sharon and Roman. So it's all magically involved, and my book is filled with stories like that, like the Bergman story and so many others. But that's the Sharon Tate story.
So the last question that I have to ask, from your perspective, is life existential?
Yeah, it's being or nothingness. That's all it is. You either have to be something or you have to be nothing. I mean, it's a choice, and the courageous choice is to be something. The non-courageous choice is to be nothing, because then you're not risking anything. You're not doing anything. You're waiting for your next incarnation, if you will, or you're waiting for something to happen to you. Whereas life is about making things happen.
I honestly cannot disagree at that point. And of course, we are far into the cups. We've gone 2 hours, and I believe that we've taken up enough time for this evening with Phil Proctor. And honestly, there's just so much more that we could talk about, and you are incredibly welcome to come back anytime that you would like.
Thank you. Let's stay in touch.
I'm going to go ahead and basically pimp out for next week. And there's somebody that's showing up for next week that you might recognize.
Who's that?
A gentleman by the name of David Osman.
I've heard of him. Yes, he's a member of the Firesign Theater, I understand.
And
right?
Of course,
but I thought he was dead.
and of course, once again, proving the fact of passion and effort and commitment, he's going to drop in during between the performances of a play that he's doing currently.
That's right. Up on Wood Island. That's right.
And
in fact, I'd love to watch that show. So you have to send me, the connection, whether it's the Google thing or the Skype thing or whatever. And,
I will definitively link you. And of course, for the third week, we've got Optic Decay coming on, a great internet artist. And for our Christmas show, I didn't think we'd have a Christmas show, but we are going to, and we're going to talk about, this is a subject that's going to express my ignorance in the fact, but we're going to talk a lot about transgenderism with the lo-fi. For lo-fi, she has become a complete transgender person. And wow. I'm going to be one of the people that, like I said, there's going to be ignorance in what I'm saying, but everything is genuine because it's something that I think it's an issue that's not covered with a lot of hate and hostility.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really seriously looking forward to talking to her about the whole thing. And of course, if you are fans of the late night, then we are the crossroads of overnight. Please check us out, both Cadunt and myself, as we do our Insomnia Ramble stream, starting about 2-ish every morning Eastern Standard Time. Please feel free to drop by and say hello. And really, if you can't sleep and you want to stop by, please feel free and hit us up, because honestly, we are all about just people talking and having a good time. There is literally no combat involved with this, because that's all silliness when it comes to the end of it. And once again, I would love to thank Phil Proctor. We hadn't even covered even a tenth of your career, but I feel so honored in the fact that you were one of the people that was able to influence me in my humor style. And you are welcome anytime you would like to come back
Thank you.
onto the
Well,
show.
we can do it again, and I hope Aiden will follow up as well. I'd love to participate in her show as well.
Oh, Aiden definitely gets a lot more viewers than I do, and I would so encourage that because the more exposure that we can get to your work, especially Firesign, that
Great,
is going to be fulfilling to myself.
great.
And I
That's
just want to make sure, open the floor before we end this. What would you like to say to anybody that's watching right now, whether they're trying to get into the business or whether they're trying to make it through life?
Well, I know there are people trying to get out of the business too, you know. But basically, again, my own philosophy and the success that I've had has had to do with a couple of things. One is try not to say no to anything. Try to say yes, uh, because you will learn from every experience that you willfully accept into your consciousness, and you will connect with people on various levels, sometimes invisible levels, mental levels, spiritual levels, higher consciousness levels that will uh, ultimately help you to fulfill your dreams or your destiny in life. And you should learn as much as you possibly can while we have this existence and get as skilled as you can in the areas that you want to pursue. And I guess the most important thing of all, which is a cliche, but it's really true, do that which is fun for you. Pursue something that is fun to do, and you will be a happy person.
And I don't think there's anything better than that. Uh, Love your existentialism, people.
That's right. Embrace your existentialism.
And I would like to say, like I said at the beginning, there is no prognosis. There's no diagnosis. Everything that we've talked about tonight is healthy and brings forward the ability of everyone to be able to experience life in the fullest. So I will say thank you very much to Philip Proctor. It has been an amazing interview. Once again, the door is always open. And I'm hoping that I can see a little bit of video of the show that you're doing right now. I will be a dick at this point and encourage you to put as much on YouTube as you can because, of course, the people that are out there are looking forward to sampling you not only in the things that you've done previously, but of course the things that you're doing now, because that is of the utmost importance.
I agree.
And of course, from myself and from our run-in by Aydin Paladin, that's such a sweetheart, and I'm hoping that she brings on Firesign to her side of the internet.
Good.
My name is DocGriffon. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. And, of course, thank you for being present and in the replay. Thank you. And the doctor's office is closed. Good night.
Good night.